organization called Action for Freedom is planning on appealing a dismissal of its case that challenges the health regulations related to COVID-19. They want the Cape High Court to declare the consultation process of the health regulations invalid and argue that 3 months is supposed to be given instead of 30 days. To discuss this further, we're joined by Action for Freedom spokesperson Connell. Hello and welcome to Radio 786.
Oh, hello, Khadija. Thank
Connell,
you.
just take us through some of these concerns that have been raised by Action for Freedom, and what are the concerns particularly with the manner in which South Africa is going about implementing these health regulations?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity and a really great question that you're asking. Firstly, the government has issued several notices in respect of a response that how they wish to regulate a coronavirus disease, public safety, etc., etc. Now, in the process, obviously in the realization that these are regulations that are no less impacting on people's daily lives, but more so their human rights and constitutional rights are likely to be affected adversely. And for that reason, they would have to consult the public. But we looked and saw that the government was actually giving people the period of time for consultation, which is far below the minimum period permitted in law in the National Health Act. Now, there's a Promotion of Access to Justice Act, and it has regulations. And under Regulation 18, subsection 2, it provides that government can give 30 days period for public consultation when it considers regulations or as such. But when it pertains to the National Health Act, it is very clear at Section 90, subsection 4A, that the government must give the public 3 months, at least 3 months notice before the period or the date that they contemplate to publish those regulations.
Connell, there has already been concern around the manner in which the proposed regulations have been put forward to the public. There's been concern that certain appendices were not available in the drafts. There was also concern about the language that had been used in this. And it points to, I suppose, placing a barrier between the public and government and them fully understanding what it means when they either agree or oppose these proposed regulations. So how then do we address this? Because it really comes down to a communication issue here between the public and government.
You put it really so nicely, Khadija. On the issue of language in itself first, we just think, according to the Promotion of Access to Justice Act, they should publish in at least 2 languages. And then they have to consider the regional languages as well. Let's say, for instance, if you're publishing in the Limpopo region, what is the main language being spoken there, etc. Okay, and the government has chosen to publish these in English. And looking at the court case that was conducted on the 26th, which we've live streamed, someone commented to say, listen to that. I can barely make out what they're talking about. And I've also taken the time to read this act. I can't make out any sense. Now imagine that if people cannot make any sense of what the law says, then being asked to comment on it and being given 30 days, and especially if it's not in your language, it's completely over your head. So laws could be made which are impacting on people's lives, and people could be deprived of their rights, perhaps to say no or yes to something, but then it has never been properly communicated to them, and they cannot exactly communicate what they want to government. Because there's one thing to oppose something, right? You say, no, I don't want that. But what is it that people do want? But do they understand that expressing what they do want is perhaps either relevant or not relevant to the subject matter that the government is bringing forward to them? So it's very important. You raise an absolutely important point about language. And South Africa has 11 official languages. And it doesn't mean that each person who is speaking one of the official languages is fluent in a second language. That's not necessarily the case. So the question has to be asked, do those people have a right to be communicated to in their language? What about persons who are blind? What has the government done to provide them with an instrument for them to be able to read, like Braille? What about persons who are deaf? See where this is going?
Colonel, indeed, these are great concerns that have been raised, but we've just seen now that government has released a statement saying that we now have until the 5th of July to comment on these proposed health regulations. So how does this now impact your application for dismissal?
Right. Now, you raise, again, a very good question. And it's lovely to hear that you guys are really on point about this. Now, looking at this publication that the government's put out about 5 minutes to midnight last night, and it's rather strange, also peculiar, that they would do it at that time when nobody's would be watching. So people are just landed with it on their laps the next day. The document is dated the 4th of May. And now the government states in this document, there are actually two documents in there. But what the mainstream media is paying attention to is that which pertains to the words an extension to comment period. But extension up until 1. If you're taking it right up to the 5th of July, just for argument's sake, what exactly is that? Today is the 5th, so 5th of May, 5th of June, 5th of July. So that's 60 days. 60 days, but he calls it an extension. When was the first time most people got to know about this? It wasn't until after we took the government to court and people started realizing, what? Most people, what? There was a notice out? We were asked to comment? But I haven't received it. I lived in an area where there's no network. Oh, we had load shedding. No, I don't know what it is because it's not in my language. And still, again, this is only issued in English. So how much time do they have? They do not have what he considers to be a 3-month extended to 3 months. Even that notice that he has put out today falls far below the minimum standard. Because you cannot simply come and say that you are extending it. You need to cancel the notice because for many people, this is the first time they get to hear it, and give them afresh the minimum of 3 months. How does that affect our issue of appeal? If you will recall that in our press statement, we've put it out and we want to get the court stamped and dated version of the judgment that they had issued, that at paragraph 26 of this judgment, the judge criticizes the government for criticizing our interpretation of the law and says that the government's interpretation of section 90, subsection 4, sub C, is completely wrong. And it says the government wholly fails to support or substantiate their own interpretation, and therefore their argument fails. It means that our interpretation is correct. Now, what's funny, really strange, the court then turns around in the same judgment and says that our interpretation is wrong, and they are now using the interpretation of the government to give reason why our interpretation is wrong. This is in the same document. You cannot make this up. You have to ask yourself the question, how can that judgment make sense? So that is a point of fact. We've also given the court the relevant references in the law. Even the government's own lawyer admitted that although the what they call PAJA, the Promotion of Access to Justice Act, regulations, talks about 30 days, the National Health Act talks about a minimum of 3 months, a minimum, which means it could be 6 months, it could be a year. Then he came up with this argument, but the government can just pick and choose, between 0 days or 3 months and maybe 30. The court said, no, that's nonsense. There is no such provision. So we asked them, show us where in the National Health Act does it say that you can give the publishers 30 days. They can't. You know why? Because there is no such provision in the Act. So the minister does not have such power. For that reason, we are appealing on the basis of that, and the court's own interpretation as a response to our interpretation when they dismissed the government's interpretation is, I will use careful language to say, it gives the impression of a perversion of justice. So we will be appealing that judgment in itself, and we are also considering other aspects, because this notice in itself has further dubious elements which we will be making clear in the course of today, because we'll be sending the minister another letter.
Colonel, thank you so much for enlightening us this afternoon on Radio 786. He's a spokesperson for Action for Freedom.